Hello, welcome to Shining Light on Death. This is a project brought to you by Janki Foundation, which is a UK-based charity which integrates spirituality in healthcare. And integral to a lot of what the project does, it looks at how positive thoughts, compassion, kindness, how they support well-being, how they prevent illness. So a lot of our projects are by way of volunteers, um, putting together things like this, like a conversation that we brought to you today. The donations that the charity receive goes towards supporting a hospital in Mount Abu, Rajasthan, which is the western part of India. It serves a deprived population. So my name is Suja Chandran. I also work as a social worker in a hospital, and I also support psychosocial care in hospitals and by way of training and education. If you're new to this charity, I would request you to look through the events section in the website. It has got a lot of really good lectures, some workshops that we've done, but content, there's a lot of content in terms of study days. And it would really support understanding and integrating spirituality in healthcare. So the Shining Light on Death project, which we've been running for the last 3 years, we received a lot of good feedback as part of the study days and the conversations and workshops that we ran, which was quite humbling. To know that we were probably on the right track. There were people who really benefited from it. What we also received as consistent feedback was that we need to support the work towards bereavement. So while we were thinking of putting together a project for bereavement, little we didn't know anything about COVID at that time. Also, we didn't know the impact of it, even though we were, going through it earlier this year. So now we know that COVID has got a significant impact to all parts of our life. It's quite a shock to our system. It has, I think in a lot of ways, people have started questioning the way we live, the way we die, the way we connect. So I think people are now talking about a new normal, whatever that will be, and whatever that is going to look like. It'll emerge as time goes on. So I was just looking at the statistics that was recorded as of 25th July 2020. Worldwide, there are reported cases of over 600,000 deaths. And in UK alone, we have over 45,000 deaths, which is quite a significant amount of grief, of death, of loss. And this is in addition to what you find in terms of wars, climate change, illnesses, people dying through illnesses. So there is a lot of deaths that people are impacted by. So as a society, we are grieving in lots of ways. So just wanted to clarify that when we talk about loss, when we lose a loved one, either it's through a relationship loss or because someone close to us has died, we experience grief. It's an emotional state. It's an experience which is quite varied, and it is quite personal. It's internal. But when we talk about mourning, it's a grief ritual. It's something which is very cultural specific. It is an expression or a display of grief. And when we talk about bereavement, it's an objective reality of the whole situation. We face ourselves when someone close to us dies. So when we say, when we're trying to talk about a context, we talk about bereavement. So they're just different ways of saying the similar thing, but I thought it would be useful if you hear that, just to kind of look at that. When we're talking about grief, it is a very personal, individual, internal journey, and sometimes we don't have access to that when people are experiencing that. So if death is a taboo, or if there is silence around it, grief has got much more of a silence around it. And hence it's important to make sense of it, find a way to talk about it, find a way to create safe spaces like this so that we can talk about it. And most importantly, we need to grieve well. What I have experienced in the last 3-4 months of COVID really descending upon us and talking to several families, what I have seen is, so these could be families who are definitely impacted by COVID, but could have relatives who either were critically ill in hospital, or they've lost somebody who's died due to COVID. So they're different experiences, but they're all experiencing some sense of big change, a big loss. And I think it is incredible pain through that loss. But what has also been meant is that there are some deep conversations that I was able to have with people where they are trying to talk about what is the meaning of life and what's the purpose of life. What I found was that there was a general acceptance of the body dying, but they were inconsolable in their grief on how their relative died. So I think for them, where there was compassion, where there was kindness, where they felt a sense of being understood, being listened, their experience of grief is quite different. There is a sense of calm about that death. But where that's not been experienced, when the relative died in circumstances when they didn't experience that level of compassion or care by healthcare, they find it quite difficult. Their grief is complicated. So is there something we can learn from the dying? What is it that the people who were dying in their last few days, what is it that they were able to tell us? I think I was just looking at some of our lectures that we have. Dr. Peter Fennick talks about papers that have come about in the last few years, and the research on near-death experience. And what he says is that 90%, spread through that research that was done, it looks like 90% of the dying who were conscious till the end, they experienced light, kind of a white light enveloping them. They experienced deep love, compassion, wholeness, feeling of unity. So the dying were telling the ones who were remaining, like people, who were not dying, their relatives, that it's not as scary. The experience is not scary. They were, in fact, reassuring us that there is nothing to be afraid about. So I thought that was quite an interesting thing, isn't it? It's almost like a service they did for us, saying that it's not a scary experience, so don't worry, I'm in a safe space. I am going towards a safe space. So we also came across this term through our conversations with Bridget Haley, where she said about sacred space, and we explored in workshops on how do we create a sacred space for this very sacred and unique journey. So the sacred space is where you enable the dying who is going through chaotic emotions to deep surrender. Through this, there is a transformation of the consciousness, and I think what comes about is this level of deep peace and tranquility. And while they're withdrawing from the world, there is that sense of calm as they withdraw. So this reassures the person who's on a journey, who's going away from this physical form. It enables the ones who are left behind to say goodbye out of love rather than pain. So it's powerful. It is powerful when you own death rather than being led by it. That's what we learned from what the dying were telling us. So Dadi Janki, a spiritual leader and also an inspiration for this charity, took complete ownership of her life, her every thought, of how she wanted to die. And she did not want people around her to remember her in grief. She died this year, just a few months ago in March. and she was 104 when she died. And the lockdown meant that she had a quiet funeral, just exactly how she wanted it. And she just, and also it inspired many people around the globe to just meditate and be in peace. One of her messages was that she's got several messages for us to learn from, and we probably could do a whole program on what on what her teachings were. One of her messages was that the soul is on a journey, and when a soul leaves the body and is on that journey, we need to shift our consciousness from grief to appreciation. So from grief to appreciation. So it is the spiritual connection which helps us make sense of this loss. So I think this is a good time for us to just look at what is it that Dali Janki also asked us to do. I would just like to take a moment and remember that. And if you have a pen and paper, just make some notes, just keep it next to you. Through the conversation, there might be some reflective questions that might come up, which you could answer at a later time. So I'd like you to take a moment and remember the person you have lost or who has died. What quality, meaning, and positivity did they bring in your life? So even if it's a difficult relationship, is there some meaning they brought in your life? Can we just take a moment and remember the dead? And may their souls rest in peace. Just take a moment of silence, remembering them.
It would be really nice now to introduce the diverse panel that we've got, who all have experience in transitioning through grief, whether it's personal or professional. We met online a few weeks ago, and we were able to share our stories. And I think that was an incredible journey. We didn't think how powerful it will be, but it was great. Not all of us know each other. We just happen to have an interest in the same area. We try to understand through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I think through that, what we really found was that it's not a linear trajectory. It's not something that that we go one after the other. So we could be grieving for a long time, or we could move from denial to a stage of acceptance in a moment of clarity. There are times when pain is unbearable and guilt is unbearable. And there are times when you transition to having a sense of calm. So it was quite varied. It was very individual. And what we have learned is that through this experience, our worldview has changed. And I think we have got a better understanding through our own experiences of how we connect and how we help other people and how we bring in hope to other people. So in the next hour, we'll have a conversation on how the panelists transition through grief, their own grief. We will then have a meditation, and we will have a question and answer session. So please feel free to write. I think quite a few people have already started writing, which is great. We are also quite aware that there are a few people who probably are not from UK, so it'll be great for us to know. Special welcome to those who are not from UK, and for us to know where you're hearing from. So I take this opportunity now to introduce our panelists. I wish to introduce now Irene O'Reilly. So Irene works in a busy London hospital and supervises bereavement counsellors in a hospice. Irene has a long-standing interest in supporting those impacted by loss, end of life, and bereavement. Welcome, Irene.
Thank you for having me.
The second panelist we have is Nina Buchanan. Nina is a funeral celebrant and self-empowerment coach. She has also worked in the voluntary sector and education. Nina also serves in end-of-life care, in bereavement counselling, and is an experienced meditation practitioner. Welcome, Nina. Our third panelist is Viraj Patel, who worked as a dentist, now volunteers at the Janki Foundation, and is an experienced meditation teacher. Viraj believes that when spirituality is placed at the core of a life, it's enriched and provides her with strength and agility to navigate through a busy world. Welcome, Viraj.
Thank you, Suja.
And our fourth panelist is Dr. Baneera Shrestha, who works as a pediatric consultant with special interest in young people with eating disorders, food allergies, and gastrointestinal disorders. Baneera is also a clinical and educational supervisor for pediatric postgraduate trainees. Baneera strongly advocates psychospiritual well-being of healthcare professionals, which lead to improved workforce sustenance and improved patient care. Welcome, Baneera.
Thank you so much.
So this gets us back to the question in terms of why we are here and how have we all transitioned through grief. So I take this opportunity to request Irene to share your journey and your work.
Thank you, Suja. Can you hear me? Okay?
Yes, fine.
Great. I thought I would actually share my own personal experience of grieving for my father. And it was actually a very, very interesting in terms of the fact that my father had actually been admitted to hospital. He was admitted to hospital at the age of 91, and he'd been living independently for 3 years. And over those 3 years, he'd actually managed to cope very well, although he was suffering from macular degeneration, which is failing eyesight, as well as angina and a blood disorder, but nothing that was actually restricting him. But on this particular day that he was admitted to hospital, he scalded himself when he was making some tea, and it brought on a panic attack, which led to him being admitted to hospital later that day. So medically, he was actually he was okay, but what happened was the impact of him being admitted to hospital and no longer being independent basically led him to feel that actually he did not want to live any longer. He did not want to be alive. And he was very blunt about it. He told us all that this was his wish. And so for me, my struggle was actually witnessing his spiritual death. So it was him spiritually no longer wanting to be part of this world. And so my grieving started then. My grieving actually started months and months before he died. So actually over those 8-9 months before he died, I was making regular visits to Dublin along with my other sister, and we were taking turns spending the weekend with my dad. But I think what really was very hard was the fact that he had no interest in engaging with life in any way. He wasn't really interested in family news or in looking at pictures of his grandchildren. So my feelings around that verged from being angry and frustrated to being very depressed. And so that grieving process was actually happening before he physically died. So it was a very challenging time.
Yeah, it does sound challenging, and it does sound painful, isn't it, to witness something like that? And I was just wondering whether is this a good time to ask about pain and what was that experience of pain and getting out of pain, if there is something like that? Yes,
I mean the pain was in a sense, it was that realization that he was no longer wanting to be part of my world, my life, and he had decided he was going to leave. He wanted to not be in the world anymore. So that was the pain when he was physically alive. I think when he died, the impact was still, although we knew that was what he wanted, the impact for me was a complete disconnection. I felt like I'd fallen off a train, I jumped off a train and I couldn't find my feet. So I felt unbalanced. I didn't feel grounded. I found it hard to concentrate or focus. So there was something about that state of actually being, the initial impact of his death was that I needed to remove myself from life and the world psychologically. And that meant almost, it meant that in terms of grieving, the world was too busy, too noisy, too much intrusion. And there was a vulnerability I had that meant I needed to be in a quiet place, which is what I did.
Yeah. Did you find that you would oscillate between being in a quiet place to being out, or was there sadness and anger? Were there those things you oscillate between two stages?
Absolutely, there was oscillating. Certainly between anger and depression, I would say. So the anger that my father would want to leave me. So there was something around even as a middle-aged woman, feeling like an orphaned child, that actually this was my second parent. And so my father was wanting to leave this world. So that was the depression, along with the anger. How could he? How dare he? So there was a whole process of the child in me really resisting and protesting that my parent would want to leave me. So it was very, very much a pendulum there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just wondering whether, in your experience as a bereavement counsellor, do you find people move between these different stages, and do you get a glimpse that they are moving towards healing in some ways? Is there a sign?
Yes, I mean, the stages of grief are not linear stages, and there's something about I think most people, we like to package things and we like to feel that, okay, that's done and I've sorted it, but we can be reminded at any time. It could be 10 years later or any time, or there could be associations with that person. So there's something about the stages can be, it's part of the grieving process. So that anger, shock and denial to start with, and anger, then we can move through the bargaining. What if I'd done something differently, if I'd done something. And so it's very much about how we understand what's happening to us. And I think for me, it was actually more about understanding this is okay, this is all right. If I thought I was over anger and now I'm not, I've just gone back to it again. So it's all okay.
Yeah. So it's like a concentric circle sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah. And in terms of healing, I think there's something around what does healing look like for anyone. And I think there's something about how we come to accept. So acceptance can take a long time, but it's about how we, if the death or the loss is actually restricting our lives in any way, or holding us back, or we're stuck, or we're not able to move forward, then that's what needs to be looked at and talked about within a counselling environment. So I think the healing is very much about being able to live the life that that person would have wanted you to live, really.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Irene. We'll come back to some questions, and I can see some people have started asking questions, but we'll do the question and answers later. But I definitely want everybody to keep typing in, and I'll collate the questions later. So I'd like to now request Nina to share about your experience of grief and transitioning through grief.
So thank you, Suja, and thank you, Irene, for sharing such a beautiful story, sad but beautiful and very enlightening. So I want to talk about awareness and how it impacts the grieving stages. So based on my own experience of the grieving process, the only way out of grief is through it. If the emotions are there and raw, it's important not to run away from them. Denial can be a safe space for me to make sense of the thoughts, feelings, and the emotions that are triggered. We shouldn't feel we have to face them all at once either. Though it is really important to say, however, and whatever we do, awareness is the basis of our actions, and it will determine how I deal with the bereavement process. And the aspect of denial in grieving is intimately linked to awareness. Therefore, it's natural and only becomes unhealthy when people are unable to accept their grief for long periods of time. So my story goes like this. I was in my mid-30s when my father lost his first leg to diabetes, and I can remember the different responses in the grieving process for me when he lost his second leg and when he finally died in 2005. The different ways in which I handled the grieving process in those three different experiences gave me insights into how my level of awareness progressed in dealing with grief. The loss of my father's first leg for me, I felt as if someone really close to me had died. That's interesting. I had this acute, dreadful feeling of having lost a loved one, and that loss, that feeling overwhelmed me. To this day, I remember receiving the phone call and I was triggered into this emotional drama of the toddler having lost its favorite toy or had its sweet taken away. And I was observing this toddler, but there was nothing I could do to detach myself from the feelings and the emotions that were being expressed at the time. I was inconsolable and felt extremely sensitive throughout the whole time. I was supposed to be supporting my mother, who was really the tower of strength. She was strong, she was brave, she was compassionate, she was loving, detached, but basically just being there, not just for my dad, but for everyone else who were grieving. And I was wondering how it was possible that she could remain so strong. In fact, I was there to drive her to and from the hospital, but emotionally and spiritually, I was supported by her strength and her courage. I think my father lost his second leg when I was in my mid-40s, having graduated from being a mindless party reveler to someone engaged in learning about personal and spiritual development things. My response to the incident was much less emotional. There were no emotional outbursts. There weren't any tears as such, no sadness or feeling sorry for my father as I did in the previous case. And I remember that my focus was on supporting him through an emotionally and physically challenging time, showing compassion and holding a practical and subtle space for everything to flow smoothly. My father passed about 14 years after his second amputation, and by then I had further upgraded in my pursuit in seeking answers to questions about the deeper meaning of life, and would honestly say the grieving process to his passing was more about acceptance, gratitude, celebration, and love. So moving on from there, about a year later, on observing my extended family's expression of grief to the passing of my mother, I received a lot of insight into how I had changed, how far I'd come in terms of my self-awareness, in accepting the reality of change being the constant in our lives as human beings. And then there was another brief experience I had just 2.5 years ago. A very close friend, very dear close friend, passed suddenly from a heart attack whilst at work. She was in her early 60s, a friend on every level. She was also everyone's friend and mentor in many ways, as well as those who experienced her charm as a public speaker in the spiritual and personal development world, and in education as a lecturer. And so the reaction to her passing was like, it was like a shock wave that, went through the wider community. Everywhere people were talking about her passing. After the experiences of both my parents passing, this was indeed a test on every level, as I observed myself oscillating between acceptance and denial. This is where my understanding that we are non-physical beings and that there is no death was put to the test for me. At times I was subtly in denial of this loss, not being able to see her again in this life. A sense of sadness and grief would seep into my awareness. At other times, when I was seeing her immortal nature, there was complete acceptance. And this interchange between acceptance and denial continued, but gradually reduced over time. So thank you, Suja. That's my story.
That is very beautiful in terms of how you've kind of shown the life stages almost.
Yes.
And does that, so do you feel that as we grow spiritually or as we evolve, our understanding
Yes.
of grief generally, is that what you've seen in your work as well? Is that something that
absolutely. In terms of my own practical experiences and how I've seen people really progressed in their understanding of self and their maturity. Yes, it's a very natural process, definitely.
Yes. I was just also thinking about when we say, there are sometimes when we use something very simple methods, say affirmations, and if we are able to just use affirmations, when we say just be grateful or I'm a wonderful person, it has got a way for us to just zone into our original nature in a lot of ways. And I was reminded of a recent radio program about the song "Feeling Good," and there was a teacher who sung it as a music teacher. She sung it with a group of children, and these are children who were impacted with a lot of context. There was domestic violence, there was probably abuse and all that. And they were quite withdrawn. And the fact that she just sang that song with them and then them repeating that song as almost like a mantra,
yes.
I'm feeling good, I'm feeling, that was like a chorus, that transformed those children
yes.
to be engaging. And I was just wondering whether you had some ways of affirmations, looking at affirmations as part of your work, which has helped people, and would you like to share some with us?
Yes. So earlier you talked about grieving isn't just about someone who has died. It could be a relationship. It could be some kind of loss, not necessarily relating to death. And some of the things, affirmations that I would come up with and I talk to people about are things like, I celebrate your life. This is in the case of someone passing. I celebrate your life and accept your absence. And if I keep repeating that affirmation, then I'm working with acceptance. I celebrate. It's a very joyous thing to be reminded of. I celebrate who you are. I remember the good things about you, those qualities and virtues. And that in itself is acceptance. Another one I love is...
Should you just make a note of this? I think some people might want to write it down.
Yes,
if you want to repeat that.
yes, I will. Another one that I often use is for those people who are feeling really bad about the way they are feeling in going through the grieving process is, I experience peace within. So if I basically just take my attention inside, focus on my breath, and just for a few moments, begin to focus your attention inside. I experience peace within. I find acceptance and healing. I grow in strength. I experience peace within. I find acceptance and healing. I grow in strength.
You have one more for us?
Yes. Another one is, I embrace change in celebrating the joys and acknowledging the sadness that it brings. I embrace change because a lot of the times we're having difficulty with the fact that things have changed, and it puts us in a place of sadness, of loss. So it's about working with accepting the fact that change is inevitable. It is the constant. So I embrace change in celebrating the joys of having known you, even if it's a relationship that has ended. I celebrate the joys of having known you and acknowledge the sadness it brings. What that means is that I'm feeling sad, but not to feel bad about feeling sad. It's to accept my sadness, and that in itself will bring me back to equilibrium.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
It's a way to remember, isn't it? How are we remembering the person we've lost?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for that. This is a good time to ask Baneera to share your journey. Baneera, if you would be able to share with us your transition through your grief.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I'd like to thank Suja and Janki Foundation for giving me this amazing opportunity. This is something, first of its kind. So please pardon me if I fumble or mumble. I'm not used to this. But at the same time, I've been allowed to share how I've managed my grief and also prepare for my own death. And it's been really lovely working with you participants and for sharing how you have transformed yourself through grief. But above all, I'd like to thank all our participants, the audience who have taken time on a Sunday night to sit with us and listen to this talk, and I hope it will be helpful for you. If I could start by sharing a story that I've heard my mother say to her relatives when somebody had lost their dear one. This is a story of Buddha. So one day a lady came to him, very, very distressed and lamenting, and she was carrying her dead child with her, and she asked Buddha to bring him back to life. When Buddha asked her, go and bring one mustard seed from a household who has never experienced death. Of course, this was in vain. She could not find any household who had not experienced death. And that's when she realized the universality of death. So fast forward to about 18 years ago when my mother died. The pain was very all-consuming. This distress that you could feel when I felt her ice-cold body, that I would never see her again, never touch her again, never talk to her again, or never feel her love or kindness. As a Hindu, I was made to go through the rituals, which didn't bring me any solace. And that's when I was reminded of impermanence of life by a Buddhist monk. And he said, we are all here as a temporary resident. We all come here to go one day, to die, and that is but certain.
Yeah, that's really, that's a powerful story, very beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Do you feel that when we are, when we come with that realization that life is impermanent, it is quite grounding, isn't it? And a lot of people say that it's transformational when they experience somebody close to them die. So was that, do you feel your story, your life has been transformational in that sense? And how do you see that transformation?
Definitely. I would like to say that was possibly the start of my spiritual journey. And I learned that I have to rejoice over the merits of people in our lives. I have to be grateful for them, and that death is merely the end of the body that we inhabit in this life. And we can always connect with our loved ones in many different ways. Since then, one of my favorite quotes is, be happy that it happened and not that it ended. This led to make me look for more answers. I read a lot, listened a lot, and started in meditation. And I started asking myself, why do we face so many storms in our lives, despite leading our lives seemingly quite morally? And that's when I realized that these storms are actually there as a gift in the sands of time. The situation is here to teach us and make us grow. I also looked into the cycle of life and death. And what I've realized is that we are all in a drama with a screenplay. And we never know when this play will end. So it's up to us how well we play our part in this drama. You never know which act will be our final one. And just like when we are leaving for a holiday, we'd like to keep our house in order. Similarly, I think we want to keep our house in order to make sure that our next journey will be a pleasant one. And if we need to come back, then this house is not in a disordered mess. With effort and practice, we can only become the best versions of ourselves. We cannot control any situation, anyone, even our own bodies. We can't control our process of aging and dying. But all we can do is try and work on ourselves with effort and practice and try to become who we think we'd like to look at one day.
That's quite a powerful, deep knowing, isn't it? It's life experience and also learning about truth and going towards it. How have you integrated that profound learning of what truth means in your work as a consultant pediatrician? How does that come in your work?
I think this has helped me a lot. Knowing myself, I think, helps how to deal with different situations. And I know everybody in this audience and our panelists have faced different kinds of losses. As a pediatrician, I find it extremely distressing, even now, after 30 years of pediatrics, to see a child succumb to their illness. But what I've realized is that with sincerity, with utmost kindness, love, compassion, we can look after the child and the parents and hold their hand through this journey. Let it be through the illness, or let it be if they have to face grieving process. And that has helped me tremendously. And I think that does reflect in my practice as well. I think we don't talk about spirituality with families, what their spiritual taking is and what that means to them. And I think this is worth exploring with children and their families. So, yeah, I think.
You're also a great advocate for your colleagues. And I was just wondering, all these experiences, how do you advocate for self-care? What is it that you would tell colleagues who are working in healthcare in terms of how do they take care of themselves while doing difficult work such as this?
I think the main thing is to feel firstly, and then to show genuine sympathy for them from the heart, and offer any help in any which way we can, including practical help, which could be for their physical or mental well-being. What I've also learned is how not to be. Things that I have heard people say, and perhaps I have also said, so please forgive me, is knowing exactly what a person feels, because everybody grieves differently. And also not to say anything to undermine their loss, like they are in a better place. Make light of their bereavement by saying things like, time will heal. Make assumption that because they are back at work, that they have moved on, or the grief is not as much. That may not be right at all. We have to allow ourselves to feel the stages of grief, go through it. It is a natural process. But at the same time, knowing that maybe I need professional help, because if we seem to be stuck in that process, then I think that's the time. Like, for example, I lost a patient a couple of years ago. It was extremely distressing. I went through guilt, bargaining, sorrow, and all sorts of emotions. And when I was receiving counseling, I realized that, like any wound, takes about 6 weeks to heal. If I seem to be stuck in this self-reprimanding process, that's when I need to seek help. And I need to try and help myself, which will then help others as well.
Thank you. That's really sound, good advice that we can all use. Thanks, Baneera. I'd like to now request Viraj to share her insights. And what has been interesting through listening to all the other panelists is that everybody in some ways goes towards celebration of the person, remembering the person, and accepting the reality. And I was just wondering if you had some insights through your journey in looking towards acceptance, and how do we get to that point?
Thanks, Suja. Acceptance. Well, acceptance isn't a word I ever thought I'd use when my father passed away about 16 years ago. Because how can the loss of somebody you love so dearly ever seem acceptable? But having gone through different challenging situations since he passed away, and having experienced different forms of loss, because loss isn't just through death. It can be the loss of a friendship that you cherished, the loss of your health, the loss of a job, loss of your finances. So having gone through different losses, I've now come to realize that acceptance isn't realizing or acknowledging that what has happened is okay, that I feel all right about it, or I approve of it. It isn't any of that. It's about just realizing that this is what it is. This is the situation I'm in, and this is my reality. In the case of my father was gone, and I had so much more to do and share with him. But the truth was that he was never going to come back, and there was nothing I could do about that. And I just couldn't change it. But I guess somewhere, somehow, along that journey, I must have stopped fighting or resisting the reality, and I must have stopped longing for things to be different. I must have just surrendered to what was happening and just learned to integrate that loss into my life and live with it and move on. But I realize the journey of acceptance isn't easy. It's very individual, as you said, and it can take time. You know, for me, there are some losses that I could accept easily, but there have been some losses that have taken me years and years to accept, because you're not just dealing with the death of somebody, but there are many other factors involved, like the loss of a future that you'd hope to share with them, or the loss of an opportunity to make up for any differences that you had in the relationship. But since my father died, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned from all the losses, it's like what Nina said, that change is an inevitable part of life, and no one and nothing lasts or stays in your life forever. And that's just the way it is. That is what life is. And the only thing that I do have is the present moment. And I know my father would want me to live that moment and every moment with hope and purpose, just like he would have done the day he passed away 16 years ago.
That's quite beautiful in the way that acceptance is really not forgetting. It's remembering, but being in the present. It's in some ways we are locked into the past and future, but being in the present is the way to accept the reality. But that can be quite hard if you're weighed down with grief. And I was just wondering if there is a way in to get to the present in some ways, even though we are weighed down with that grief.
Yes.
Is there something that you would do to be in the present?
Yeah, so for me, the thing that helped me on my journey to move on and to heal from that pain of loss was writing, actually keeping a journal. Writing was my way of expressing my thoughts and my feelings. And even to this day, it is an important part of looking after myself, you know, my form of self-care, where I make time for myself and I sit in silence and I reflect on how I'm feeling. I go in and explore my world inside. And some days, you know, I don't need to explore a lot. The emotions are just there. They're very palpable, just like the time when I was grieving. There were days when I was just very angry, not understanding or wanting to be in the situation I was in. You know, life had changed and taken a direction I just didn't want it to go in. And at that time, I realized that I needed to release those emotions. And my way was to putting those down on paper and just allowing the words to flow, because writing was my way to, you know, give myself permission to just express whatever I was feeling. And also it was my way of managing and processing what was going on inside and around me. You know, but because I knew from past experiences that if I didn't express these emotions, then I would either end up suppressing them or denying them, and that would have an impact on my mental well-being and even my physical well-being. But also I would end up actually projecting those emotions onto other people, especially my anger, and that was actually having an impact on them. It was hurting them. And so writing was my outlet. And the thing about writing is it's private. Nobody needs to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling. You don't have to worry about being judged or criticized or worry that you're rehashing the same old stories again and again. You can be absolutely honest and you can feel safe with yourself.
It does sound quite calming and healing to write. Also, it's acknowledging that we could have a range of emotions and some of them could explode and somehow you contain it by writing. It does sound, it's something you probably do it naturally, but it does sound as something where we need to commit ourselves to, we need to give ourselves time. So is there a way that people can start the process if you don't have time or if you're just too busy in the head? How do you start? What helps you?
Well, I think initially I didn't have a fixed time. It was basically whenever I was feeling very emotional, I would just write things down. Whether I was in the bus or the tube or the waiting room, I just find a piece of paper and just write something. But over time, I made time in the morning after meditating, just having quiet time, and I also write last thing at night, just reflecting on how the day went, just checking were there any issues that I had during the day, and seeing if I could do things differently if I had reacted in any situation.
Do you have, so for some people who are not used to writing, would you have some reflective questions that you could start them off? So if I find some time and I'm just sitting, what is the question that I could ask myself so that I can answer it?
So I think the first question maybe you could start with is just to say, what am I feeling? For some people it's quite easy to pinpoint feelings, but for some people it is quite difficult to put a name on a feeling. The feelings you experience in loss and grief, there's a wide range, but it could be sadness and anxiety, shock, numbness, loneliness, guilt. So once you sort of found out what you're feeling, then the next question may be, why am I feeling that? And you can explore that. And the third question could be, what would I like to do with knowing that? So I think those three questions can help start the exploration. But sometimes, if you may not be in a space where you want to actually look into why you're feeling something, and so I find at that time even writing a letter can be really effective. Writing a letter to the person you love, just having a conversation with them, that conversation you didn't manage to have with them. Maybe just saying to them that, how much you love them, you miss them, and how sad you feel that they won't be around for, birthdays and anniversaries, but also to include something that you appreciate about them. You appreciated their presence in your life, and to remember something special about them, maybe their kindness, their generous nature. Because I found that when I started to express gratitude and appreciation, and not to just focus on loss, then it just made me feel better in myself. It helped me to have periods where I wasn't just stuck in that sadness, because there were times when I've been absorbed in sadness, I found that, my heart would just shut down, where I wouldn't be able to express or support people around me. I wouldn't be able to express love or kindness, to take their help in any way, but also I wouldn't be able to give that either. But there are days where you can get stuck, in the sadness, because the pain is just so overwhelming, where you feel totally powerless and distressed. And this could be because you have maybe feelings of regret, of past mistakes that you've made in the relationship, because past memories can really complicate the grieving process. Or it can be guilt that you had, that you weren't able to be with them in their last moments, or you couldn't help them or protect them. So at times like that, I found writing a letter of apology is really powerful. But at the same time as writing a letter of apology, to also write a reply that they would send to you in response to your letter. Because, you know, what would they say to you if you said that, you know, you feel really guilty or you have a lot of regret? Because if the relationship was a loving one and a close one, then they wouldn't want you to feel sad. They wouldn't want you to feel guilty. They would want you to be happy, to live out your dreams, to move on, to make the most of your life. And they would, you know, understand and appreciate that you tried your best.
So it's a letter of love from you to the other person and from the other person to you. And love is a very powerful quality. It's an intrinsic quality of ours, isn't it? It is something which transcends beyond the bodily limitations. It's a vibration that just goes out. So it's something which we can still send our love through our pure feelings to the person who's passed away, the person we lost, the relationships that we've lost. We can still communicate through love. I presume that's what you do in meditation.
Yeah. So
Is that something that we feel that we are loved? We just feel, and in that kind of being, the way we connect is completely different and transformational.
yeah. So, you know, when you say that you're remembering somebody, it's really remembering their qualities and their beauty and the meaning they brought to people around them. And at that time, you're actually connecting with their true inner selves. You know, you're able to connect with that because at that time, you're actually tapping into your true self. And your true self is when you are in your highest state of consciousness, you know, when you are connecting and expressing your highest form of love and peace and wisdom. And yes, meditation is that way where you can connect and experience your highest self. So when I meditate, I sit in deep silence and I practice quietening the mind and focusing the mind on thoughts of love and peace. And what I found, especially when I was grieving, is that even if I spent just 1 or 2 minutes having these sort of thoughts and experiences, it helped me to move the mind away from that sadness. It helped to disengage from that pain and create a space where healing could happen. And just as you said, you know, love is a great power. It is amazingly healing. And spiritual love is true love. It is a love that has no dependency and no selfishness, no fluctuation, because it's a love that's not based on the physical. It's a love where you are actually connecting with the core of that person, the truth, you know, their inner being. It's almost like having that soul-to-soul connection with them. And I found a powerful way to share that love is through meditation. So when I have thoughts that are full of love and good wishes and pure feelings, it creates a pure vibration which reaches out into the world and it touches everybody, and especially those who are grieving alongside me. But it also touches that person who's moved on their onward journey as well.
So we'll have a short meditation. I'll run through a commentary. If you could just sit comfortably and relax, take a few deep breaths and turn your attention inwards. You're going to create your own special place where you will feel safe. It can be a place you know, or you can create it as you would like it. In your imagination, choose a scene in nature that you particularly like. By the sea, in the mountains, by a lake, or in a forest, or in a park. It can be a special building or a special room or a special couch. It's your ideal place, completely safe and secure. It's peaceful. It's your own special place where you feel peaceful and positive about yourself and the world. It has a special atmosphere that seems to wash over you and make you feel good from inside. Really bask in that atmosphere for a few moments. As I experience being in this special place, I'm feeling good. I'm filled with love. I'm filled with love. As I reflect on the discussions I had in the last hour, I intuitively know that death is a profoundly transformative event, although I may not consciously realize it. I understand that through my own reflective process, I can actively participate and experience the dying and grieving process in a natural and healing way. I slowly surrender to the inevitable, to the fact that we are all mortal, that life is impermanent. I become more consciously aware of my life journey, that change has always been part of my life. The more I'm aware of the process of dying and grieving, the deeper and more authentic are my connection and conversations with people. I'm consciously aware of the fact that my enduring connection and conversations with loved ones are very important to me. I know I have the courage to say goodbye. It feels comfortable to let go of everything and to accept what is happening to me. I experience how it feels to be free from all that is weighing me down. I experience transformation of my consciousness, from my personal sense of self to my essence. In this experience of freedom, I am cradled by deep, unconditional love and surrounded by a healing light. This light is warm
It's soft. It's comforting. I feel completely safe. I feel very peaceful and immersed in love. I am love. I am love. Now it's time to leave my safe and loving space. Have a look around your special place and take in the feeling of familiarity and happiness. Breathe that in and feel a sense of contentment. You're leaving only temporarily, as it is a place you can revisit at any time. And now slowly come back to the room. Deepen your breathing. Become aware of your chair and your feet on the floor. Open your eyes, rub your hands together, and have a stretch.
Thank you, panelists, for sharing. We have got quite a few questions here. And are you able to see some of the questions? What I could do is start from the beginning, because I think people have asked as people went along. So if a few other people have questions to ask, please do type it in. So this is a good time for us to have that question answer session with the panelist. She cried a few months after her father died, but since then, anyone dies who I know by face, I cannot bear, and I cry for weeks, feel sorry for family, don't know how to cope. Irene, what would you say for this person?
It's again, I think it's like what we talked about earlier. There is no. I think Nina mentioned that grief and grieving is painful, and it's something we have to go through. We can try and avoid it, but it's about looking at ways that can help us grieve. So in terms of what Viraj said about writing or journaling, and so it's about how we express that grief and finding a healthy outlet for it, a healthy way of expressing and sharing that grief.
Thank you. There's a question here. Can panelists share how one comes to terms with the feeling that the person who left had so much more to give? The grief is more around sadness that the person could not do all that he should have. Nina, would you be able to take that question?
I didn't actually put my hand up, but I'll actually try to answer the question. I think that, yes, there's always the feeling, particularly if the person is young, that's left, that, you know, it's a shame that they could have done more. But as change is the constant in our lives as human beings, so too, it's like whatever has happened, it's like it's a natural thing that was supposed to have happened. That person was, in a sense, to use the word, predestined to leave at that particular time. So even in that, there's the need for acceptance. And I think it's very important that we do go through the stages of grief that we need to experience as a result of our level of awareness, and just accept that's where we are, and try and experience that grieving process and work it out for ourselves. We'll come to a point where we just simply accept this person left too soon, but it's not too soon, it's the time they were supposed to leave.
Another question that we have is, my mother left at 4 and cried for her and talked to her even though I didn't know her. Is this unusual?
I think there's something about also our age when we have a loss. When you have a loss at the age of 4, it's a very, very deep loss that needs a huge amount of time and exploration, because it's about a whole childhood and adolescence. So there's something about the respect that those losses need, and actually the grieving, not just for the death of that person, but for the loss of the mothering that wasn't available to you. So there's a lot there, and it's really about, in a sense, taking the time to give yourself that time to grieve, and grieve for your loss.
Thank you, Irene.
I think Viraj's suggestions about writing a letter and all those different tips that she shared would be very useful for this person to try.
And I think it's almost like a loss of a hope of something that could have been as well, isn't it? So that's
Yes.
a valid way of losing somebody, and acknowledging that's quite as valid as a person that's there in front of you. There is another question here about a relationship. I ended my relationship a year ago. After 8.5 years, we were friends for 21 years prior to the relationship. My mum passed in April this year from the virus. I feel like I'm having two parallel experiences of grief. The relationship has made me so angry at all the time lost from seeing my mum. And now I have lost my mum. I cannot get this time with her. My emotions vary daily. Is this normal?
There's something about when we have more than one loss, and how when we haven't really had enough time to come to terms with one loss, and then we have another loss on top, or a trauma, or what's happening in the world right now, it exacerbates and it complicates and compounds our losses. So there's something around the fact that there is so many losses, but they can't all be looked at the same time. But it's just understanding that this can really complicate our grieving process. So it's how we look after ourselves and how we attend to ourselves and acknowledge the amount of loss and grief that you would be going through with so much happening and having happened.
Yeah.
And
I'd like to concur with what Irene has just said. I would say to this individual, please take good care of yourself, and really do not be upset, do not be angry with yourself because you're stuck in this space of grief. Really just look after yourself, because it's in doing that will enable you to move a way out of it, move through it.
Mm-hmm. This question says, as death is inevitable, should we discuss it at school, which will enable us to better accept reality? Then perhaps grief will not be so debilitating. I was just wondering whether Baneera could share insight on that.
It's funny how you asked me this question, because I was thinking that as well. And I completely agree, because I think we really shy away from death. I think we don't think that this is going to happen to me, or if something happens, like, I know there is a great sense of sadness in losing somebody, but we are going to face it. So I agree. I think we should talk about it to children, to young people, to adolescents. Like in my family, I'll just give an example that we talk openly about death. I have told my husband and children where I want my ashes to be dispersed. And also, if they don't want to, that's also absolutely fine. And similarly, I talk about organ donation, and we are all potential organ donors. And I remember this family who the teenage boy sadly couldn't be resuscitated, and he had a brain death. But the family had already decided to donate his organs, like every family's organs. And this boy donated to 9 children, 9 people, and that is, that is being prepared. and what to do, what use are we if we can't be of service to somebody? And this just demonstrates that talking about it. And children, I think it is so important to talk to children, because children can't express, they don't express, they express it in very different ways, very, they might come up with psychosomatic illnesses, but yet we don't recognize that they are also grieving. And it is so important to look at children and how they are dealing with it. So, when a child has, a parent has lost a child, often they'll say, no, I don't need counseling, I don't need bereavement support, but actually I encourage them. I say, your grief is very individual, your child and each sibling's grief is very individual. So I really urge them to please take, and they say that, oh, we have a lot of friends and family. It is not the same. If you take help from somebody outside, professional, I think it is so important and it is really valuable. I hope that answers your question. So the answer is yes.
We
Don't shy from it. It's inevitable.
That we've answered the question for now. So we're just going to continue answering a few more questions. There is a question for Viraj. Do you think part of acceptance is when we use different language? For example, I still say passed away to say died, or dead is tough for me. To accept, do we need to change our language? That's the question.
I think in terms of using, whether you use somebody's passed away or died, I think that is okay. I think the language you have to be careful with is the language you're directing towards yourself. In that grieving process, if you are feeling guilty or are saying negative things towards yourself and not allowing yourself that space to heal, I think it's more important there to use the right sort of language. I think that is the important thing for acceptance.
Because the journey is all inside, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just what we say outside, but I think as long as we are saying it to ourselves and moving through the stages, I think that would be good. There's a question here: how do souls adapt to afterlife if they have been taken suddenly? That's by an accident, an operation, in childbirth. Are the souls confused of the sudden transition to this new place, especially if the person had no idea, concept of being a soul without a mortal body? It's quite a heavy question. I'm asking quite a few questions there. So I think the point is, if you hadn't had a chance to probably do some of that work and you suddenly, it's kind of sudden death and doesn't have that maybe spiritual backing in some ways. So can I ask Nina to answer that question? No?
I thought you would. Yes, I was just listening to you talking about that. I had this kind of feeling of being shunted out of the body. It's like 1 minute you're in the body, the next minute you're out. And of course, the soul is that which, or the inner being, the non-physical self, is that which actually carries the consciousness. So there will be that shock to the system. And for a while, that consciousness will be a bit disturbed, there'll be distortion, confusion. But the soul is a very, very intelligent being that will naturally, eventually find its way away from being in this dimension without a body.
Yes, I think this is quite a deep topic. It probably needs a lot more exploration, and we're attempting to give a simplistic answer, so we're quite aware of that.
Yeah.
And I think what we had learned through the Shining Light that lectures, I think somewhere they said that sometimes some people have got that time, they know beforehand. I think the body kind of knows when it's going to die well in advance. We don't sometimes are zoning into that. But some people have to go through that transition pretty quickly, but all people go through that transition. It's just that how conscious are we at this point of time. So it's something, I think if it's okay, if this answer is okay for now, you probably can explore it again later.
Yes. Yeah.
And another question is, any insight into what do we do about regret and guilt? Regret and guilt is a kind of a lower energy, isn't it? Which sometimes keeps you heavy and not able to move forward. But it's about acknowledging it and making sense of it in some ways. Is that okay to start with when we're talking about regret and guilt?
I would say that dealing with regret and guilt, if I feel that those two issues are really stopping me from really experiencing peace and joy, what I need to do is to become more cognizant of that part of me that is peace. And Viraj talked a lot about meditation and how meditation, when you practice meditation, it really brings you back to that place of essence where there is no regret and there is no, so it was regret and
guilt.
And guilt, where there's no regret and there's no guilt. Because when I come back to essence, it's only myself and I, and you know, that energy of divinity that's sustaining me. And so I become the detached observer of whatever it is around me that's causing me to feel a sense of regret and or sadness. So the more I practice being in that space, the more regrets will move further and further away from my orbit. It's not about really trying to pick it to pieces and getting to understand it. No amount of that is going to allow me to distance myself from it and become that observer of it, which is what actually, you know, dismantles it, takes it away, pushes it away.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, we probably just need to end with just a poem Irene has got for us. If you're able to read that for us, Irene.
Yeah, sure. This is A Blessing for Absence by John O'Donoghue. May you know that absence is full of tender presence, and that nothing is ever lost or forgotten. May the absences in your life be full of eternal echo. May you sense around you the secret elsewhere which holds the presences that have left your life. May you be generous in your embrace of loss. May the soar of your grief turn into a well of seamless presence. May your compassion reach out to the ones we never hear from, and may you have the courage to speak out for the excluded ones. May you become the gracious and passionate subject of your own life. May you not disrespect your mystery through brittle words or false belonging. May you be embraced by God, in whom dawn and twilight are one, and may your longing inhabit its deepest dreams within the shelter of the great belonging.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you for your valuable contribution, and thank you for all of you who has taken the effort to listen and to reflect and ask us questions. Of course, we haven't been able to answer all the questions. There are quite a few. We'll attempt to put something on the website. So I was just reflecting on some of the things we learned today, and what the panelists were able to share, that their own life journey, that they were able to have the courage to go through that grieving process, and new insights came about in their life. It became quite transformative. in their own life. They were able to then zone into the learnings and the meanings that they had. And because of that, they were able to be there for people whom they're supporting, especially as a healthcare professional. They are their presence, their listening, their connection, it has transformed a lot of that. And I think what was valuable was this whole understanding that life is impermanent, that we would go, and what is it that we need to do on a daily basis. How do we consciously live with that reality and not be burdened by it? And how can we be more appreciative of the people we've lost, or find meaning in those relationships, and find the essence of what's remained in those relationships. I do want to read, before we end, the affirmations which Nina did say. I celebrate your life and accept your absence. I experience peace within. I find acceptance and healing. I grow in strength. I embrace change in celebrating the joys of having known you and accepting the sadness it brings. And Viraj's 3 questions for us is, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling? And what would I like to do? So if you have feedback regarding this program, if you want to share anything, please do write an email to us. We will put it up on our website. Okay, thank you.